You get the promotion, you land the client, you're finally where you worked so hard to be. And then instead of celebrating, your first thought is, oh no, what if they realize I have no idea what I'm doing? That's imposter syndrome at work, and it's not proof that you don't belong. It's just your brain trying to keep you safe by running an old mental program built on perfectionism and comparison. Let's unpack why it sounds so convincing and how to rewrite the code. I'm your host, Emily Shutt, a professional certified coach with over a decade of experience helping smart, driven women untangle their drama around money, relationships, and well being. I'm here to help you do the same using science backed coaching tools rooted in cognitive behavioral theory, positive psychology, and peak performance. You'll leave with actionable steps for approaching your own life with clarity and confidence. Let's get into it. So I have a very memorable moment where I personally felt like an imposter, and I just knew it would be a great topic to cover for today because we've all experienced some version of this at some point in our lives. I was attending an invitation only conference that was a pretty big deal for me, and I was just excited to get to be in the same room as some of the heavy hitters in my industry of personal development. A few weeks before the conference, I and several others were given the opportunity to apply to speak at the conference. I thought that seemed scary, but I coached myself on it. That's one of the perks of being a coach. And I decided to apply. I am already experienced in public speaking, and I felt like this should not be a problem. I also didn't think I would be selected, honestly. So I was applauding myself for just being brave enough to apply, not thinking I would have to actually follow through on anything. And then I got picked, and my brain freaked out, which is really fascinating to me because I know I have public speaking experience and I'm not afraid of it at all. I know my subject material, I'm a solid storyteller. So, what was my problem? I dug in a bit deeper and realized the only other factor that was coming up for me was that I was going to be in the company of other professionals who I deemed more quote unquote real or more official than me. I was the imposter, and everyone was going to figure out as soon as I opened my mouth that I didn't belong there. They would be so embarrassed for me and they would be cringing to themselves, waiting for my time on the stage to be over. This was what was happening in my mind. So from there, my brain went on to suggest that not only did I not belong there, but I would probably be kicked out of the conference. The organization would cut ties with me for embarrassing them with my inferiority. And I would have to crawl home in shame, never to be taken seriously as a thought leader in the coaching space. And I probably shouldn't even be in the space. Like, who did I think I was? It got really intense really quickly. And this is just what our brains default to doing. So that's really important to be able to highlight for yourself when you have those I don't belong here moments. Like we can be very quick to take action stemming from our imposter syndrome before actually getting to the root of the thoughts that are driving that. Because the thoughts can be changed and the type of action you need to take depends on the type of thought you're having. Like if you dismiss it as just not being good at public speaking, so you over rehearse to make sure that you do it perfectly, when what you're actually afraid of is other people judging you for not doing your stuff. Or you might initially think that the imposter syndrome is coming from fearing others will judge your material. So you over index on pulling together all of your supporting material and planning for every possible question you might receive so that you look competent. But the real issue is that you actually hate your body and are crippled by the idea of people looking at you and you alone on a big stage under a bright light and thinking all the mean things you think about yourself all the time. So, any and all of those thoughts and more might be what you really are thinking, but it's important to know which ones are coming up and addressing them one by one. It's usually not just one thing, so we have to really spend some time just starting to untangle what our brains are doing. When I'm working with the women that I coach, imposter syndrome typically shows up with some distinct patterns of phrases. The one I hear most often is, I just need more training, then I'll feel better. Or I just need to lose weight, then I'll fit in there. Or I just need to rehearse more, then I'll feel good. It's like some version of that. It's always some external thing that they say that they need, and then the feeling they think they will have when they get the thing that they say that they need. And it always shifts. Like the goalpost always moves if you're paying attention because the thoughts stay the same no matter what, unless we change them on purpose. So think about why these feelings persist, even for people who are clearly competent and accomplished in their fields. Our feelings don't come from our external circumstances, they come from our thoughts, always. And it's easier to think certain thoughts in certain scenarios, sure. And I think that's why people get confused or resist the concept. But we can cultivate new thoughts on purpose, regardless of our circumstances, if we make time to practice doing this intentionally. It's just like working out at the gym. Like, can you run a marathon tomorrow if you've never run before? No, probably not. But could you run a marathon in 6 months if you make time to practice running each week? Yeah, probably. but you can't do it without practicing. When we try to fight or hide imposter feelings instead of naming them, it's like trying to push a beach ball under the water and hold it there. Like you can do it for a while, but it takes effort to hold it down and eventually it will spring back up and like hit you in the face. Bringing the metaphor into the real world, if I had rehearsed my talk for this conference to the point of perfection, which I pretty much did anyway, but then didn't work through the thought that I don't belong there, I might give a decent presentation, but I would still be freaking out the whole time and have a terrible experience. And even if I had told myself going in that the way I'd prove I belonged was by doing a great job, which is what a lot of us try to do, and then I did that. When I got off stage, my brain would just shift to thinking how boring my topic probably was, or how unflattering my outfit is compared to the other presenters, and like who would take me seriously if I'm not in perfect shape. The imposter thought is going to warp into whatever it needs to keep you thinking something is wrong with you. It's going to come up with any distraction technique it can to align with the core thought that people don't think that you belong there because you already think that. Like the beach ball hits you in the face when it bursts out from under the water, the same way a thought that you weren't conscious of will hit you in the face when the action you took to address what you thought the issue was did not actually address the issue. We want to think about how to normalize these thoughts without pathologizing them so that we don't have such a visceral reaction to them. And that way we can start to shift the energy right from the start. So, how do you normalize it? One trick I like to use for myself, and it's popular with my clients too, is to think about it like you're watching a movie you've already seen before and really like. So, you already know the plot and that the complication gets resolved, but you're watching the part of the movie where there's some kind of challenge or disruption. The imposter thought is the disruption, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't belong in the script. It's part of what makes it interesting. And you can look at it like, oh, this is the part where I feel some anxiety right before I get up on stage. And that isn't a big deal. Even though I do a lot of public speaking and I don't dread it at all, I still, to this day, years later, will get a little like tummy flip roller coaster feeling right before I walk on stage. The difference is that I see that as just part of the experience for me, not as evidence that something has gone wrong or that I don't belong there. So I will say this again. Imposter syndrome isn't evidence of a problem. It is just an unhelpful default thought mechanism reinforced by patriarchy and perfectionism. And here's what I mean by that. For generations, we've been conditioned to believe that confidence has to be earned and that you have to prove your worth before you're allowed to feel capable. Women, especially, were told to be competent but not too confident, ambitious but not intimidating, visible but not too much. That persists today. That double bind creates this impossible tightrope where self doubt actually feels safer than self trust. If you start from the thought, maybe I don't belong, you're already braced for rejection, so you're less at risk of surprise or shame. Self doubt gives you that kind of psychic safety net. If you experience failure, you won't be caught off guard when something goes off script. That's basically what your brain is trying to do. On the other hand, self trust means opening yourself up to possibility, and possibility includes maybe you will belong, maybe you will succeed, maybe you will be seen. That can feel riskier if you've been trained consciously or unconsciously to believe that you have to earn belonging or that showing up means exposing weakness. Because here's the kicker, many of the signals we internalize from patriarchy and perfectionism tell us that if we are real or good enough, we'll feel confident. We wouldn't question ourselves, we would just know. So when we feel the opposite, I'm unsure, I don't feel ready. What if they realize I actually don't know what I'm doing? We conclude erroneously that we must be incompetent. And rather than look at the system of messaging that we've absorbed, we blame ourselves. And men get hit with a version of this too, just with different packaging. They are told that not knowing something or needing help means weakness. So instead of admitting uncertainty, they will internalize it. That's how you end up with whole rooms of adults secretly terrified they'll be found out and pretending everyone else has it all together. The culture trains us to see certainty as competence when in reality, certainty is usually just conditioning. The idea that women must prove competence before expressing confidence is deeply rooted in patriarchal norms. For example, if you look at corporate culture or leadership culture, historically, women who speak up confidently are often labeled as bossy or abrasive, while men speaking up in the same way are labeled as assertive. That means many women learn early that visible confidence can come at a cost. More subtly, perfectionism plays a big role. Women and men in certain systems get this message. If you don't do it perfectly the first time, you're showing that you don't belong. So instead of experimenting, risking, learning, you hide the cracks. Risk looks unsafe. Doubt looks safer. And to some extent, we mask it as responsibility or preparation, but we're really avoiding taking a risk or doing something big. And to be clear, patriarchy doesn't just hurt women. For men, that often sounds like don't let them see you sweat. You're supposed to know the answer, be the rock, be the provider. When that's the script you're handed, there is no safe space for not knowing. So even healthy self doubt, which is totally normal, starts to feel like danger. For men, asking for help, showing uncertainty, admitting that you're still learning, like that can be coded as weakness. So men may bottle up self doubt instead of letting it come to the surface. In both cases, the internal voice says if I show uncertainty, someone will decide I don't belong, and that is dangerous. So you preemptively doubt, and the same system that tells women to shrink tells men to perform in vulnerability. Both are exhausting. Both disconnect you from genuine self trust. So here's the deal, those thoughts don't come out of nowhere. They're shaped by the water we are all swimming in: patriarchy, perfectionism, capitalism. All of it rewards a certain kind of performance. And for high achieving women, that often looks like being competent, polished, agreeable, and above all, grateful to be in the room. We all remember the viral speech from the Barbie movie, yes? Like, there's a reason that struck such a chord. From the time we're little, most of us get the message that it's safer to shrink just a little bit, to be nice, to be prepared, to over deliver, because women who are confident without the, like, I'm so lucky to be here energy are often labeled as arrogant or difficult. So we learn to preempt the label by doubting ourselves first. If we say, oh my gosh, I hope I did okay, no one can accuse us of being full of ourselves. So when we talk about dismantling patriarchy, we're not talking about blaming men. We're talking, or at least I'm not, right? We're talking about loosening the grip of a system that taught all of us that being human with all the complexities that comes with that is a liability. Because underneath all the different coping mechanisms, the overachieving, the self criticism, and the pretending, the root fear is the same. If they really knew me, they'd realize I don't belong. Perfectionism then picks up where patriarchy leaves off. It whispers that if you could just do everything flawlessly, never stumble, never sweat, never send a follow up email with a typo, then maybe you'd finally feel legitimate. But the bar keeps moving. The more competent you become, the more your brain decides competence is the bare minimum. So those distorted thoughts, I'm not enough, they're going to find out, I just got lucky, they aren't evidence that something is wrong with you. They are evidence that you've internalized a system that equates worthiness with flawlessness and visibility with risk. And it ends up being very harmful. So we want to question and push back on those norms, starting with our own brains. There are so many invisible rules that we absorb that quietly shape how we think about confidence. Most of them aren't written anywhere, they're modeled, implied, or praised until they start to feel like facts. One of the big ones is if I were really good, this would feel easier. That is such a sneaky one because it assumes that mastery means comfort. But in reality, growth almost always feels awkward. And you can be highly competent, but something might still feel uncomfortable. It's how we relate to the discomfort and the meaning that we assign to it that determines our experience. Another common one is if I don't know everything, I shouldn't speak up yet. That's the perfectionism rule. The belief that credibility comes from encyclopedic knowledge of everything instead of the lived experience or perspective that you would organically bring. It keeps people quiet in rooms where their voice is actually needed. It can feel very frustrating and deflating when you do want to say something, but either can't get a word in edgewise because someone else is dominating, or you just aren't sure if what you have to say is important enough. You can use I statements like, I wonder if, an idea I have is, I'm realizing from my own experience that. Those types of phrases have a tone of curiosity that can feel like a safer entry point than the pressure to make a declarative statement of fact before you're feeling like you're allowed to do that. It's a way of starting to practice speaking up in ways that feel less risky and let your comfort and confidence grow over time. This is about practice, so try those out. Then there's everyone else seems to have it together, so something must be wrong with me. That one thrives in comparison culture, especially in an age of polished Instagram reels, LinkedIn updates, and TikToks. What you don't see is the 99% of their day that looks exactly like yours: messy, uncertain, and very human. A big one I hear from high achievers is if I slow down, I'll fall behind. That rule creates a kind of treadmill logic where rest or reflection feels like too big of a risk. But constant motion and trying to prove your worth every day keeps you too busy to notice how you're doing, where you are, and where you want to go. Like, you're not a shark. You need to be able to stop moving from time to time. My personal favorite, confidence comes from mastery. That is the ultimate trap because you'll always find new evidence that you are not quite there yet. In truth, confidence isn't the result of being qualified. It is what allows you to use your qualifications effectively, trusting yourself to navigate challenges even when you don't do it perfectly, because none of us are doing it perfectly. That is not a real thing. The through line in all of these is the same. We mistake our harsh thoughts about ourselves for evidence of actual deficiency, and we need to challenge those assumptions. The people who grow the most are the ones who have learned that doubt is just part of the process, not a verdict on who you are. So, how can people start to distinguish between facts or objective capabilities and stories or mental narratives where imposter feelings arise? The first step is to slow down enough to notice what's actually happening in your brain. When imposter thoughts start spinning, they feel like truth, but most of the time they're just very, very persuasive stories. So I like to ask the simple question, what's the data? Not what do you feel, but what can you objectively point to? Did someone explicitly tell you you're unqualified, or did you fill in the blank because you assume they must be thinking it? Facts are observable. Things like I've been in this role for 3 years. I met 90% of my goals. I was invited to present at this conference. Those are facts. Stories sound like I only got promoted because no one else wanted it, or they're just being nice, or I just got lucky. Those are interpretations, those are stories. A practical trick is to imagine you are a neutral third party looking at your situation. And this is hard to do, but it can be learned. If a friend said what you were saying, could you see their evidence? Like, could you measure it somehow? If not, then it's probably a story. It's also helpful to notice the emotional intensity. If you're having an emotional reaction to a statement, it's probably a story that you've pieced together with some facts woven in, but the story isn't a helpful one. So you can even say, the story I'm telling myself right now is that I'm not ready. That small shift reminds your brain that there are other interpretations available. You don't have to prove the story wrong. You just have to remember that it's not automatically right. And let's say that the story you're telling yourself feels totally true and believable. You believe that you are not ready, but you want to be able to do the thing you don't feel ready to do. So the next step for you is to start to practice the thought, it's possible that I can become someone who can take on this challenge, even if I don't feel perfectly ready, because you're never going to feel perfectly ready. That day's not coming. I don't think that's always a thing. I think what we're trying to tell ourselves in those moments is that we want to feel perfectly prepared to do the thing perfectly. And we have to work on seeing ourselves as someone who has the self efficacy and self compassion to do the thing, even if we do it imperfectly. It's not as bad as you think it will be, but you won't know that until you start trying. So, why do our brains love to use others as proof that we're the outlier? Comparison is one of the brain's oldest survival tools that's been repurposed for modern life. Back in the day, comparison helped us figure out where we fit in with the group, like who was safe, who had resources, who we could learn from. But now that same mechanism is being applied to everything from someone's cringy LinkedIn post that AI wrote for them to their vacation photos on Instagram to the athleisure that they're wearing to Pilates. For women, especially, comparison gets tangled up with how we've been socialized to earn belonging. We're taught that worth is relational, that being good is something reflected back to us through approval from others. So we start scanning the environment constantly. Am I doing enough? Am I too much? How does she make it look so easy? And because our brains are wired to notice threats, we zero in on that when someone else has the thing that we think that we're missing. The irony is we almost never compare laterally, meaning we don't look at people at a similar stage or in similar circumstances. And you might be thinking, that's not true. Stacy and I are at the same level at work, and she has a much nicer apartment than me. But you almost never have full access to everyone else's whole story, their circumstances, or their lives off camera. We take one fraction of their life and extrapolate it to conclude that their whole life is quote unquote better when we just don't have access to their whole lived experience. And even if we did, it still wouldn't be helpful. Because social media gives us 24/7 highlight reels, we're comparing our internal experience, those messy drafts and anxiety and self doubt, to someone else's finished or even completely fabricated product. There's also a gendered nuance here. Men are often socialized to compare hierarchically, to win, to compete, to measure up. Women are socialized to compare relationally, to belong, to harmonize, to not outshine. So comparison takes slightly different shapes, but it's the same root fear. If I don't match what I see, I won't be accepted. The fix isn't to stop comparing. That is impossible. I mean, I would definitely recommend taking an extended break from social media for sure. We have an abundance of research now documenting the negative effects it can have. That is no surprise. But if you're not ready to downgrade to a dumb phone or like a clamshell and swear off social media, it's still more useful to notice what your brain is doing with the comparison. Is it using someone else's success as proof that you're failing, or is it evidence that what you want is possible? That shift from comparison as self judgment to comparison as inspiration changes everything. And when you catch yourself in the spiral, try this reframe. How cool is it that she has that? That means that's available to me too. That could be a loving partner, a beautiful trip to Europe, a great new job, a book deal, whatever it is that you're noticing that you wish you had. It's a reminder that someone else's experience is not automatically a threat to your own. A lot of times it's a demonstration of what's possible, and that's something to be excited about. So, when does imposter syndrome actually serve a function, like signaling growth or vulnerability, and when does it start to get in the way? Let's start with the upside because, yes, sometimes those imposter feelings can be useful. They pop up when you're doing something new, stretching into a role or a level of responsibility that you haven't been in before. That kind of like, I don't know exactly how I'm going to pull this off moment is actually a growth signal. In fact, research from the Wharton School found that people with imposter thoughts were often more interpersonally effective, meaning listening, asking more questions than their non imposter peers. So when your brain says, what if they find out I have no idea what I'm doing in response to something unfamiliar, that fear can be a cue that you're stepping outside of your comfort zone. And that's where meaningful growth often lives. But, and this is a big but, it starts getting in the way when those feelings persist far beyond the newness and when they trigger behaviors that sabotage rather than support your growth. So that's going to look like you're constantly over preparing, not out of like a solid preparation plan, but out of a belief that you're inherently underqualified. Or you toss aside evidence of your competence and instead lean into narratives like they must have just been feeling generous or I got lucky. You hold yourself back from speaking up, applying, taking risks, not because you're realistically unready, but because you, again, believe you don't belong there. You isolate, you don't ask for help, you don't share your feelings of doubt, and you assume that you're the only one who's secretly panicking. That's why learning to consciously observe your thoughts is so important because all of those telltale signs I just listed can only be determined by knowing your thoughts. There is no way around it. And research supports these patterns. For example, the Stanford Center for Teaching and Learning notes that when imposter feelings can emerge in high achieving contexts, when they combine with systemic bias like gender, race, or background, they become more persistent and harmful. You don't need to get rid of doubt to be effective. You just need to shift what you do with it. When doubt shows up, you can ask, what's the thought that's coming up for me? Do I like it? What do I want to believe about myself? What can I do now to start practicing believing that? Here's how I like to think about it. Imposter feelings aren't a character flaw, they're a physiological signal that you are growing faster than your nervous system can keep up right now. From a cognitive behavioral standpoint, imposter thoughts tend to pop up when your self concept hasn't fully caught up to your reality. You're expanding your external world. Maybe you've taken on a new role or launched a business or started speaking on bigger stages, but your internal belief system is still operating on an older version of like who I am, that version of whatever story you're telling yourself about yourself. That gap between who you were and who you're becoming feels uncomfortable, and your brain labels that discomfort as danger. But in truth, it's just a signal that it's time for some new thoughts. So when you start to hear that inner dialogue, who do I think I am? Or I'm not ready for this, you can pause and reframe it through that growth lens. So that's going to sound something like, aha, like this is what expansion feels like. This is my brain trying to protect me while I upgrade the software. It also helps me, in my case, to envision myself a year or two down the road when I've given talks like this and many others since, and how nostalgic it would feel to look back on that time when I was really stressed out about getting on that stage. I taught myself to believe that even though I was freaking out right now, that was going to be a temporary part of my journey, that a year from now was just going to feel like a blip if I even remembered it. And none of the heavy hitters just magically start out on those big stages. They all go through that growth and development, and that is part of the process. So it's a good thing that I'm also going through that process. I decide to make it mean that I'm on my way and that I'm on the right path. And that's where mindfulness and CBT overlap beautifully. We're not trying to delete the thought, we're just recognizing it for what it is. It's a signal that you're stretching into a new identity. That's all. And if we borrow a little from neurolinguistic programming here, we can shift the language of those moments. So instead of I'm an imposter, try I'm learning how to be this new version of myself. It cues your mind to treat the uncertainty as part of a natural evolution rather than proof of inadequacy. Because every major leap in life, personally, professionally, emotionally, comes from that little wobble. The question isn't, how do I stop feeling like an imposter? It's can I hold space for this feeling while I grow into the version of me that doesn't need that label anymore? So that's the reframe. Imposter syndrome isn't a red flag, it's just a growing pain we all go through. It means you're doing something that matters enough to make your brain a little nervous, and that's a good thing. So, here are a few practical mindset shifts or self coaching questions you can use next time that voice says you don't belong here. When the voice pops up, and it will, this is where you can put your cognitive behavioral and mindfulness tools to work. In cognitive behavioral theory terms, you are challenging a cognitive distortion. You're practicing emotional regulation and distress tolerance, and overall, you're just simply learning to interrupt the pattern before it builds momentum. So here's a few reframes and questions I love to use. First, what else could be true? Your brain offers the scariest version of events first. So deliberately look for two or three alternate explanations, even if that seems a little silly. Maybe you were invited into this opportunity because you're capable, not because someone is trying to set you up for failure. Maybe your coworker is asking you so many questions because they value your wisdom, not because they think they deserved to lead the project more than you and are trying to make you look bad. Another one, if this same thought showed up in someone I really respect, how would I interpret it then? So, this breaks the personalization loop. When you imagine your mentor or your best friend having the same worry, you often will suddenly see how illogical it sounds. It's a lot easier for you to quickly pull examples of how wonderful and capable that they are. Think of someone for whom you have unconditional positive regard and how you would reframe an imposter syndrome thought that they came to you with, and then realize that you can use that same language on yourself too. Another useful question, like I said earlier, is what is the evidence? This one is straight from CBT. Separate what's already happened from what you're imagining will happen. If the only evidence is I feel anxious, that's not data, that's just a feeling, and feelings are not facts. We've talked about this before. So, for extra credit, don't just look for evidence to justify feelings of being an imposter. Look for evidence of you being the kind of person who has worked hard through discomfort to achieve something in the past, or consider a time when you may have felt like an imposter before where you definitely don't anymore. The person you became in that process still has those skills to carry forward to this new experience. Next, what would the version of me I'm becoming do right now? That's an NLP move. So, future pacing your mindset so you align with the identity you're growing into, not the one that's scared to let go of the certainty of who you've been in the past. This is what I was doing when I imagined myself a year down the road after giving this talk and how she might approach what I was going through in that moment. I was able to see that the discomfort was just part of the process on the road to get me where I want to be going. And it's not something I have to eliminate. I just have to be willing to feel it and then just keep doing the work anyway. And then my personal favorite question that I think is really transformative and applies in so many different areas. Can I give myself permission to do it even if it's not perfect? And that's really hard for recovering perfectionists because that's really what this whole thing is about. You're not trying to feel flawless, that will never happen. You're learning to lead, create, parent, love, or build something while feeling imperfect pretty much the whole time and realizing that those two things can coexist. You can create things that you're proud of and you can feel like you're not perfect while you're doing it. And that is totally okay. You will still be able to do the thing. The more you practice these questions, the faster your nervous system learns the new pattern. Discomfort doesn't mean danger, uncertainty doesn't mean that you don't belong. That's what rewiring the software looks like in real life. You just keep choosing curiosity and self compassion until it starts to feel natural. It's important to distinguish between looking for true evidence of competence without falling into toxic positivity or fake confidence. This is such an important distinction because we've all been told just believe in yourself. And when you're deep in imposter thoughts, that advice just feels hollow, even a little gaslighty. So it's not about plastering over self doubt with positive affirmations that you don't actually believe. The key is to anchor yourself in neutral evidence, the kind your brain cannot immediately argue with. So, write down moments where you've shown competence or growth, projects you've completed, people who asked for your input, compliments you've brushed off. Those aren't about proving your worth to others. They're about reminding your brain that you have data to support your belonging and your competence. Then we want to layer in what's called radical acceptance, the idea that two things can be true at once. So, that's going to be something like, I'm feeling insecure right now and I'm still capable of doing the thing. Or I'm feeling a bit nervous in this moment and I'm still qualified. You don't have to feel confident to show up and do the thing. The feeling may not arrive for a long time, and you could have been doing the thing you wanted to do the whole time you were waiting to feel a different way before you start. We often think we're supposed to feel confident before we do something big, but that's not But the truth is, we have to actually do the thing first, and that's what builds our confidence. We have to be willing to do things imperfectly, maybe even badly, God forbid, and still accept ourselves anyway. That's what keeps us going. If you tend to overcorrect into fake confidence, like, I've got this, I'm fine, everything is great mode, but you know deep down that you don't believe it and you're still very shaky inside, try softening it with language that your nervous system can actually believe. So your brain takes language literally. Instead of saying, I'm amazing, which may trigger resistance, say something like, I'm learning to trust myself here, or I'm building evidence that I can handle this, or I'm definitely going to learn once I just get started. That subtle shift tells your subconscious that confidence is something you're building as you go, not something you need to have already had or something that you need to perform perfectly. And remember, genuine confidence is not going to be an attitude of, I'm the best one here, but something way more caring and sustainable, which is, I trust myself to know how to figure things out when I need to. The work isn't to eliminate doubt, but it's to keep collecting proof that you've done hard things before, that you can tolerate discomfort, and that belonging isn't something you earn at some magical future point when you've performed correctly. It's something you practice believing all along the way. Now, I'm sure we can all think of a person or two in our own lives where we're like, yeah, that guy could stand to have a little more self doubt in his arsenal. So hang on to your hats because not all doubt is bad. Healthy self doubt is the kind that keeps you curious and humble and open to learning. It helps you double check your work, ask for feedback, and ultimately grow. It's the voice that says, I care about doing this well, so let's make sure I covered my bases. Imposter syndrome, on the other hand, isn't grounded in reality, it's grounded in fear. It doesn't say, let's make sure I'm prepared. It's like, no matter how prepared I am, it's not going to be good enough. So, healthy self doubt helps you calibrate, imposter syndrome makes you catastrophize. Healthy self doubt leaves room for evidence. You can remind yourself, I don't know everything, but I've learned a lot. And imposter syndrome, on the other hand, is going to shut the door, insisting, if I don't know everything already, I should not even be here. So, if you're wondering which one you're experiencing, look at what the thought makes you feel and do. Healthy self doubt is going to move you towards preparation and growth, whereas imposter syndrome is going to move you towards paralysis or overcompensation or just, yeah, complete shutdown. One of the most helpful mindset shifts is to stop trying to get rid of self doubt entirely, because when you label every flicker of uncertainty as imposter syndrome, you actually spin yourself up even more. And freaking out is not going to help you feel like less of an imposter. The next time you feel that little wobble, you can ask yourself, is this self doubt keeping me honest and engaged, or is it trying to keep me small? Because the goal isn't to never doubt yourself again. The goal is to stop mistaking doubt as a valid reason to stop participating. One of the most powerful things you can do when imposter thoughts keep showing up is to think of them like a mile marker, not a stop sign. So instead of trying to silence the doubt, try building a little more capacity to walk alongside it. You can literally tell yourself, okay, doubt can come with me, it just doesn't get to drive. That small reframe shifts the energy from resistance to allowance. And that's where your nervous system starts to calm down enough for you to actually take meaningful action. The gentle way to keep showing up is to lower the pressure of what showing up has to mean. You don't need to conquer the whole mountain today. You just need to keep taking the next visible step. Maybe that means speaking up once in a meeting instead of staying silent when that's what you usually do. Or maybe it means submitting the proposal, even if it's not perfect. Or maybe it's recording a podcast when your lighting is weird. Another way to frame it is continuity matters more than confidence. Continuity is a choice you can make regardless of the feeling. The more consistently you show up, the faster your brain learns that it can trust you to do hard things, and that's what rewires imposter thoughts over time. When you choose to keep going, you're rehearsing the identity of someone who belongs in this space, not because you never doubted yourself, but because you've learned that you can feel doubt and move forward at the same time. So if I could leave you with one thought, it's this: you can belong before you believe it. You don't have to wait until you feel perfectly ready or certain or qualified. Belonging isn't a finish line, it's a decision that you get to make about yourself right now. Imposter thoughts will keep trying to convince you that belonging is something you earn through performance. But the truth is, you already belong simply because you're here, learning, trying, growing, caring enough to want to do it well. So remember, expansion and self doubt often travel together. So when you feel both at once, you're probably right on track. I hope you came away with some insights you can apply in your own life right away. I'll see you next time.